Boom. Adam Chapman. Welcome back. Omniverse Comics Guide, Book of the Month Club. Here we are again. How you doing,
Here
buddy?
we are again. I'm good. I'm excited to last time was an interesting conversation. I'll say that. So I'm excited to talk about something else.
Back into the Marvel Cosmic, I guess, but is it cosmic? We're in the time
No.
stream. We're in the space-time continuum. We're in limbo here.
Yeah, actually, well, okay. Can I start talking about it, or do we
Let-
want
we're-
to?
Well,
You should
well,
set it up some more
okay,
before I
let's
say
set it
anything.
up before we dig in deep. So this month, as we've mentioned before in some previous episodes, but in case you have forgotten or didn't listen to those episodes, what we're going to cover this month is the Avengers, Roger Stern, John Buscema era, issues 267 to 269. I think this story is known as the Once and Future Kang.
Mhm.
Is that the what it's collected as or what it's kind of known as?
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So for those who are fans of Kang and want to know as much as they possibly can about Kang the Conqueror, this is a good story to start with. But for a complete reading guide, Omniverse Comics Guide, it is ridiculous how it's in chronological order from the most recent Kang story where it fits into the time stream. So if you're a fan of Kang, Omniverse Comics Guide, my buddy Dave made a very crazy reading order. I don't know how he does it. Maybe he travels through time, but it's really good. Check it out. Adam, welcome to the show.
Yes.
Let's get into
Thank
the
you.
Book of the Month Club. This is your
Yeah.
bag. Let's do it.
So can I feel like, I have some grandiose statements or statements that are going to cause some friction with people online. So should I just, I guess, say those first?
Hmm.
So the run
Start the
that we're reading,
controversy. Yes.
yeah. So we're reading, obviously, Roger Stern's run in Avengers was well heralded. He had quite a run of runs in general in the 80s. He had a great run on both Spectacular Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man. He had a run, obviously, on Avengers. Probably the most well-known of his Avengers storylines is obviously Under Siege, which comes, not that long after this. And he brought Namor on the team. He shook things up a little bit. So it's very well regarded. And you got John Buscema on art, who's obviously a titan of the industry. Um,
Tom
it's
Palmer
interesting.
inks. I mean, the combination of Buscema and Tom Palmer is quite nice.
That's the problem I had.
Oh, that's the problem. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do it.
So I mean, so obviously, like, I've read Under Siege. That's a big one, and I haven't maybe read all of Stern's Avengers, but obviously I've read a fair bit of it at some point in the past. Which is, we're talking about a time traveler now, so that makes sense. But I have always found that the inks by Tom Palmer on this run in particular feels like it drowns out the beauty of Buscema's artwork. Buscema's artwork is very, he can make anything look good. He could draw anything. That was always the thing, right? Like, if you wanted to have someone like draw horses or cars or whatever it was, he would find a way to make it work and it would look
Hmm.
compelling. I find the inks are a little much a lot of the time, and there's a lot of panels here where they're in limbo, and and I realize that this is a problem with just whenever I see Palmer's art on him, is that he does a lot of like the extra wavy lines, like looks extra wavy, if that makes sense. Like, they're in limbo, it's supposed to be like swirling around and things are a little bit crazy. But I found I didn't like the effects that Palmer was adding in the finishes to the backgrounds, and I don't think that came from John. I think that he was probably doing more, again, the character work, but the backgrounds, which are very basic and it's just, swirling lines, really bothered me. And I realized that's probably a flourish that came from Palmer, not from Buscema. And I can be completely wrong there, but that definitely was something I didn't really like. And I know that they tried to make it more atmospheric, but and this is another issue I had with it. And this is no one's fault, but I guess editorial. But even then, who would even have known? They keep referring it to as Limbo. And if you've read any X-Men books, Limbo is a very different place.
Hmm.
And at this point in time, it specifically was a very different place. So I find that a little bothersome. But that wasn't like a huge thing that changed my enjoyment of the story. It is what it is. You just have to kind of go with them blinders. This is its own version of Limbo. Fine, not a big deal. But it was something that I did bump against because I'm like, this is just, in the same time that you had, and I'd have to check the exact dates because maybe it's not exact, and maybe this did technically happen I guess this was 86, and so I'd have to see exactly when Inferno happened, which I guess was probably 88 or 89. I don't know how early they had Sim and the other Limbo people and Belasco, etc. But I just feel like it was very different. And then what we get here is a very different interpretation of Limbo, which is fine. It just I need a reading guide, so I need Dave to give me a reading guide
Came
of
to
all
the
the
right
times
place.
that Limbo appears, because I want to know like how that changes over time. Especially like I just recently read Dark Web, which is a obviously a current storyline in 2023 in Amazing Spider-Man, and it's all about Limbo, and
Hmm.
again very different. So and it's that X-Men interpretation of Limbo, which is not this one. So it's just something I noticed.
Hmm.
It didn't disturb my enjoyment, but it was definitely something that I thought about a couple times.
Got you. Okay. Interesting. You know what's funny is that you bring up the Tom Palmer inking job, and I was thinking about that myself because I do enjoy the art in these books. There's, I don't know, a certain classic feel, timeless feel. It's very I mean, Buscema has that sort of a dignified style
Hmm.
in his art, and I think Tom Palmer also has that in his inks. But what I was gonna say is that in this case, to your point, Adam, I think the flourishes, the finished art is more of an expression of Tom Palmer's
Yeah.
finish on it than what you, because we've seen Buscema do the Avengers before,
Oh
and
yeah.
different inker, but also it looks like it. And pencilers change and they evolve and they get better and all of those type of things. But I do feel that this is more of a Tom Palmer thing. I can't remember what else he famously was on, but there was a time where I was able to recognize that it was him inking it
Mm.
based on the fact that it kind of looked like the Avengers finishes. And I'm like, he's one of those inkers where his style really comes through, which isn't
Hmm.
necessarily a bad thing. Maybe in
Yeah.
your case, you're like, it's a little bit too much, but
Yeah. I do think about it, and like I guess part of it, and I was just looking at the credits again, and it does specifically mention that it's the breakdowns were Buscema, and that the finished art. So there is usually a distinction there, because usually they'll say pencils or inks, or you'll have breakdowns and finishes. And if it's finishes, they're doing a lot more than just inking. They're adding a lot more,
yes,
and the breakdowns are maybe a little sketchier. And John was a
yes,
pretty fast penciler, so he might have been working on other projects at the same time, and so that's why he wasn't doing full pencils or full tight pencils, which is why you have more of that feeling, as you mentioned, of this feeling more like an interpretation on a theme. And it's interesting. Maybe Buscema is the not John Buscema, but just Buscema in general as a family line, because I always remember in the mid '90s hating Sal Buscema's artwork, but it's because it was inked by Bill Sienkiewicz, and I just thought it was so heavy a line. It felt
yeah,
like a Sienkiewicz artwork,
yeah,
not a Buscema. And so
yeah.
for a long time, I did not enjoy Sal, but it wasn't Sal's fault. I wasn't enjoying peak Sal. I was enjoying Sal that was interpreted by a very heavy line work and inker that, to my eyes, and I still feel this way, was not the best expression of his art.
I agree.
Whereas you go a year or two earlier on the same books, still on Spectacular Spider-Man, and it's completely different. It's the JMD stuff that we love. Sorry, yeah, John,
Yeah,
the Mateus. It's the good stuff with like the Child Within and the Harry Osborn saga, and that's with a light line work and like a
I
light.
like that his art in that. There is a very unique sort of look to Spider-Man of that time that
Mhm.
the stories, the way it's drawn and the storytelling that was done in it is very, it's so simple and easy to follow, but it's very signature of us. But when he get, like, you're right, when Bill Sienkiewicz comes on, it's just like it's too much. You're taking away from the simplicity that he brought to this.
Hmm. I
Yeah, I
mean,
agree with you on that. It's a good call.
it's obviously a tough one, right? Because you have a lot of you know. Sometimes you want to see an inker do their thing and like add a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more of them, and it's so subjective because it depends on the artist. If you really love a penciler and you love those tight pencils, then you're not going to want to see an interpretation by an inker. You're going to be like, no, I want you to be as as faithful as possible to the original line work and
Hmm.
do simple embellishing. But then if it's an artist that you maybe don't like as much, then you're like, you know what, I really like this inker. He brings something like, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
and it's not fair to either because you're so it's so subjective. So it's really tough to kind of put a beat on that one. Like I'm trying to think of very famous duos. I mean, you got Jim Lee with Scott Williams. Like I don't even know what he looks like without Scott Williams doing his inks. Trying to think of some others. Some others are
Klaus
even
Janson, Frank Miller,
yeah. Klaus Jensen's
Klaus
also
Janson and John Romita Jr.
he's also a guy who can be very heavy on the inks too. Like you usually know that it's Jansen. But I will say there is something about the alchemy of him and Romita that it's hard at times to distinguish who is really bringing what in because they look. But then you also have Romita and Scott Hanna. That's a very.
That's I kind of prefer that one a little bit more.
I would agree. There's
With the
a.
Spider-Man especially, there's a certain sheen that Scott
Mhm.
Hanna brings to John's work that it because John is already blocky and things of that nature. So Scott Hanna kind of refines it.
Are you saying John Romita Jr. is blocky?
I like his art style. I'm not one of those people who are like he can't draw anymore. I know what he's doing. I look at his stuff for there's an aesthetic I've come to accept and love, but also the storytelling. Like he knows how to move a story.
He does. He's a good storyteller. Again, we're just kind of going all over the
Yeah,
place
that's
here,
okay.
but I will say that if there's one real Achilles heel of John Romita Jr., which is both an Achilles heel and a signature at the same time, is his tech is not great. It's a lot
Hmm.
of like weird lines, and also but I will say no one does mushed up, punched in faces like John Romita Jr., especially in the mid '90s. Like if Spider-Man was getting his butt kicked and his face was being beaten in by someone, he looked like he had a mushy face, which is probably accurate to what he should look like.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah, I got a soft spot for John Romita Jr. He's there's so many books or characters that he's done where including the Avengers where you're just like, yeah, he just belongs to the Marvel universe. But getting back to the Marvel universe and the Avengers, we're talking about this story,
Mhm.
Avengers 267.
Actually,
Uh,
sorry, I apologize. One more thing about Tom Palmer of it all,
yeah.
which is really interesting. So is that he was the inker on Buscema in the Avengers in like the late '60s, early '70s. Like he
Oh,
was,
see, there you go.
but it didn't look the same. So something happened,
So
and
it's definitely a collaborative thing. I'm sure more. I'm almost sure then that
but like when I
Buscema
look at it,
probably
like I
liked it
I pulled
the
up
way
a
he
random issue.
made
I
them.
pulled up Avengers '79 from 1970, and like I mean, you can obviously stylistically you could tell it's still John, but the inking is so much smoother. It's nowhere near as heavy, and I think it lets and again, as we said, we don't know how much the breakdowns were, how tight they were. So maybe that's not really Palmer's fault because he's having to fill in the blanks on a guy he's worked with at this point for 15 years. But it did distract me a lot in the art that I felt like and I sometimes feel this way about Under Siege. Like Under Siege is a brilliant story, but sometimes I wonder what would it have looked like with a different artist or a different finisher. Anyways, these are my thoughts.
Fair thoughts. Well, it goes back to the book we're talking about. I've read these issues in the Epic Collection. Shout out to the Epic Collection and the
Mhm.
Epic Marvel Podcast. Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
Curtis Finley. The issues are collected in here. If you want to read it in a trade,
it's
this is a
called
good
Under
place to get
Siege,
it.
and it's volume number what?
16.
16. Okay.
Yeah, collects issues 264 to 277. How did you get your hands on it, Adam?
Marvel Unlimited. So
There you
I
go.
read these digitally a couple days ago.
So different ways for everybody to read it however they prefer. Pick
Hmm.
your poison. So it's 3 issues.
Hmm.
Not a lot of reading to do, but this is 86, right?
Yeah.
And it was 75 cents. Boy, did you get your money's worth for a story because this would have been 12 issues today.
Hmm. No, that's very true. A few kind of stepping in thoughts. So in general, I would say it's a good Kang story, not a great Avengers story, because the Avengers in most of the issues, I would say, they really take a back seat. It's not about them. They're almost incidental. This is more about Kang, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not really an Avengers story in a lot of ways. Like the Avengers play a part, but do they have a lot of agency here? I would say no. There's more agency given to two of the main Kangs we deal with and to Ravonna than the actual Avengers themselves. They do stuff, they
Yeah,
kind of bumble around,
yeah,
but they don't necessarily take a huge starring role. Where I would say some other Avengers epics, that involve Kang, which specifically, obviously, the biggest ones would be Kang Dynasty and Avengers Forever. They play a much more integral role. They still ultimately end up kind of being, well, less so with Kang Dynasty, but in Avengers Forever, they are kind of tossed in the middle of an existing battle that's going on between factions of, Kang and an alter ego of his own. But at least they felt like they had more agency there, and it was more about them and their adventures and what it
Yeah.
meant for those characters.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't know, like if this adventure never happened, I don't think any of these characters go about their lives any differently. It doesn't change them. I don't think it really adds a lot to their story.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The way, because when you think of other Avengers Kang related stories, there's a lot more character development of how this is affecting the history of the Avengers, how this might be like in Kang Dynasty, during the Busiek era, there was a lot of callback to Captain Marvel or Carol Danvers and her relationship with, what's the character's name? Marcus?
Marcus, Scarlet
Yeah.
Centurion.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's not a great story or thing, and a story that many people are proud of being a part of, but
Hmm.
there's a history there. And in Avengers Forever, the characters that are included on that Avengers team are all plucked out of time at a specific moment in their history that kind of changed them. So this is, when you take them out, what they're currently going through, what will they take away from this adventure together? There's something that's
Hmm.
going to be added to their character. Well, in this one, you're right. This is more of a study of the history and the machinations of Kang. And the Avengers are split up for half of it. There isn't really, I'm trying to think of what the main storyline would be with the Avengers in this, other than Namor joining the team, and there's kind of a little bit of a hubbub outside of Avengers Mansion about him being a part of it. So there's those
Yeah,
plot lines are being placed, but character-wise, this is all about Kang.
for sure. I mean, that being said, like if we look at that first issue, it's funny reading it now because we're used to things, and I'm talking very vaguely, but like we're coming up on almost 20 years since Avengers disassembled, and in those 20 years, the ranks of who has been an Avenger has increased exponentially, right? It used to be, not that it was an exclusive list. I mean, any list with Dr. Druid on it can't be that exclusive, but it was a smaller list.
Yeah.
And suddenly, when New Avengers happened, suddenly anyone could be and would be an Avenger, and especially when the Avengers as a franchise became the thing at Marvel, eclipsing the X-Men,
Hmm.
and then you had obviously the MCU, and everyone knows what an Avenger is. Like that's a huge thing. It's not like when in the early 2000s, if you Googled the Avengers, you probably got the TV series, the British TV series.
True.
Nowadays, you don't get that anymore.
That's
Um,
true.
so you open up this issue and you have Storm there and she's an Avenger and that's cool, but like I also have to be like, well, what? Like it took me a second, but I like that. Like that's a cool way to get you into it. And if you're reading this at the time, it would have been extra confusing because you'd be like, she's not an Avenger, she's an
I know.
X-Men. Whereas I'm like, wait, when I knew she eventually everyone's been an Avenger now. Like you know what I mean? Like it kind of messes with
It
you, but
kept throwing me off too because I saw Colossus afterwards come out and
mhm.
he was going to be. I'm like, what the heck is happening here?
It was
Yeah.
really cool, and I was
Yeah.
actually surprised that considering it's an '80s comic, and they spend like a good 4 or 5 pages, 4 pages until the explosion happens. That's a lot of real estate in these comics, right? And ostensibly you have the Avengers showing up, but they're an alternate reality version of the Avengers, so they're not the team that we're kind of following. But I thought it was a great intro to a story. It really sets the stakes. It makes you wonder what's going on. It kind of challenges you as a reader to be like, where am I? What am I reading? And then you have this big explosion. I thought this was a great way to start a story. And then you have like Kang bursting forth from the Iron Man armor, which is kind of a cool moment as well. Like again, there's a lot of fun, cool things in here. And I believe this is the first time you kind of had the idea of the Council of Kangs. I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. That is the I'm using the Omniverse Comics guide reading order. It is the
Hmm.
first appearance of the Council of Kangs. That's what's significant specifically about a first with this story.
And what I
Yes.
liked about it is that it's interesting that the primary Kang we follow here is the one who's given a cape, because how else would you know who you're
Yeah,
following,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I noticed that too.
which I liked, and again, like it's a nice way of kind of doing any kind of distinguishing because they ostensibly don't look that different. Before we move too much further, I should mention we mentioned briefly, kind of in passing, um, Carol Danvers and Marcus and Avengers 200. If anyone wants to go back and listen to Dave Michelini talking about that, he doesn't do many podcasts anymore. He only did a couple, and then he
Hmm.
didn't do them ever again. I was able to talk to him back in April 2016 on the Comic Shenanigans podcast on episode 366. So he does mention working on that book and how it kind of came out overnight, that they had to kind of throw a story together. So as much as there's a lot of shade given, and he recognizes that, it was also the best case scenario in a weekend of putting a story together, because what was supposed to be Avengers 200 got scrapped at the 11th hour. So they had to do something completely different, and yeah, it ended up being really messed up. Christian Claremont went to a lot of lengths to try and fix it, because obviously he cared a lot about the Carol Danvers character because he had written her book before. So that's a little bit about Dave Michelini.
No, that's a good shout. I like that because it's a turning point, for better or for worse, in Avengers history, comic book history. Like now, Carol Danvers is a major character
Oh yeah,
in the MCU, in the Marvel universe. Like there was a time where maybe she was a B-list character,
if even
right?
that,
If
right? I
even that,
mean,
that's being generous. I didn't want to be too harsh, but even that,
no, she was
right?
gone for like a long time. I mean, she was in the Xbox as Binary, and then she kind of came back, and Busick did a lot of work on trying to create a new fandom for that character when he brought her into both Avengers as Warbird, and she was kind of a supporting character in his Iron Man run for the first
Yep,
couple of years.
yep.
He really challenged that character, having her battle alcoholism, and again, it's so different now because you just don't see that character going in that direction ever again.
But that's what
But
was that's the cool thing. Sorry to cut you off, Adam, but going back to the Avengers 200 issue, it's taking something that was not so great and using it to build onto the character, and taking and using that character in very clever and grown up ways that perhaps if that didn't exist, they never would have considered trying to their best to fix the character, right?
mm,
And now look at what she became,
for sure.
almost a household name. So sorry, you were saying something before about, is just
Well,
a
no,
shout out for the episode.
yeah, just a shout out to the episode. We can get right back into the discussion of the issue, but I guess you were mentioning that according to the Omniverse Comics Guide, that this is the first appearance of the Council of Kangs, which
Yes.
is definitely pretty important if you're an MCU watcher right now. Like this whole
Yep.
concept is definitely coming into view, so it's cool to kind of see it here. It's really pared down here. I think one of the next times that Kang shows up, which is I think only a year later, they bring back this idea of the council, or I don't think it's called the council, but you
I
do
think
see
it's the
Kang's.
TVA at that time, right? Isn't that in the Fantastic Four? Walter Simonson did something like that with his run.
We should check that Omniverse Comics Guide, but
I don't
I'm
know if
not
it's there yet. I don't know if it's all there yet, but yes, I could. I have a link of how to find that out. But
okay.
that's where I felt I remember hearing or reading about the TVA once, because Kang was one of those villains that can really have a part. Like he's an Avengers villain mainly, but I think he can muck about throughout the entire Marvel universe and be anybody's
Hmm.
villain if the story so calls for it. But
Well,
plot,
here's what I'll
yeah,
say about Kang though. I think Kang is an interesting one because when he first shows up in his various forms, he's always pretty straightforward. And then it's when you get storylines like this, which start to complicate things and make it a very complex, complicated villain. And I think there is a difference between complex and complicated because at times there's a lot
yes,
of great
yes,
nuance there, but also it gets so like when you get to Avengers Forever and trying to unwind and pull everything apart because there's so many. I mean, that's just part of it's just the Marvel universe. You're building things constantly on top of each other, and you're building. It's a house of cards, right? And
hmm
so, and you keep shoving more things in there, and then you have Kurt Busiek come along with Roger Stern and try to
hmm
say, okay, let's fix this. Let's figure out how all these pieces work together so that it doesn't fall. And then after that point, people continue to make it worse. Like he cleaned it up, and then people have only made it more complicated. And you've added things like Iron Lad, and like you've added more
yeah.
elements that have only complicated. And like there's a great miniseries from about a year or two ago that
Who
with
wrote that?
Kang. Which one?
The one that you're referring to a couple years ago.
Oh, the miniseries? I'd have to check. It just literally just came out like a year or two ago. It was really good, and I think they redid it as an Infinite comic on the Marvel Limited app, but it actually originally was a trade. Let me see if I can quickly find it. I think it was just called Kang the Conqueror
Yep.
originally,
Yep.
and it is by Colin Kelly and Jackson Danzig. I don't even know really what they've done otherwise, but I will say it was a very good series and very interesting. But again, made it more complicated because Kang only gets more complicated the more you pull them apart, and you have all the different alternate realities and what this actually means, and all the different iterations, and you have Immortus, etc. So it only gets more complicated. So I think what I like about him, Kang as a general character, is the idea of a warlord from the future comes to the past to defeat the greatest heroes ever. That sounds like a great hook. Great.
Yeah.
Then it gets so much more complicated, and I'm a little bit worried sometimes with the MCU that they're going the complicated route instead of
Yeah.
the simplified one. Whereas if you see the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes TV series, they did a very classic, clean version of Kang. The guy coming from the future and he's fighting the best heroes, and he wants to be able to defeat them. That's Kang at his essence. Um,
Yes.
but since '86, Kang is complicated.
Yeah. You're right. That I keep saying that as well. Like I haven't even watched the most recent Ant-Man movie, which involves Kang, which is kind of a nice
Hmm.
little symmetry to do a reading list for him. But it's getting to that point of being complicated instead of the complexity of the characters and the, like you said, the interesting points of where they are in the stream of time. And you could really do that with something like Kang. But in this case, we get into that. I don't know if I've mentioned it before on the Cave of Solitude podcast and a couple times when I'm talking to Dave, but there's that Netflix show Dark
Hmm.
that deals with. Have you watched it by chance?
I haven't, no.
I think you would like it because you're a Back to the Future guy like myself. But it's that divergent timeline
Hmm.
where who's who, what, when in the stream of time are you coming here? Like which version of that person are you? And once you get into that territory, it's fun if you like that sort of thing. Or it could just be like, I don't know. I don't know what's what. I'm confused. So in this case, the long short of it is Kang is revealed to be killing divergent versions of himself, who
Yes.
make up the Council of Kangs.
Yeah, which again, not they make it simple to start because this three issues does not, it's complex here. It's not complicated yet, I guess, because you're
Right.
only dealing at this point with, we see three variants throughout this story. One who gets killed pretty fast, and then the other, the rest of it's really just the other two. One who's scheming, and the other one who actively fights the Avengers more. You have Ravonna. You Roger Stern does a pretty good job of making a very simple characterization. There is a lot of dumping here in terms of information dumps, but I thought he did a good enough job making you understand who these different Kangs are and what makes them different from each other, and why the Caped Kang, that's his name now, why the Caped Kang needs to defeat the others, why he needs to be the only one left, and ultimately what is his undoing. And so again, here it's complex, but it's interesting. We talked before, or I mentioned before, how in a lot of ways it's not a real Avengers story because they're just kind of thrown into it and they're kind of incidental in a lot of ways. And that being said, Roger Stern does his best to at least give you a lot of good characterization for the Avengers, which I would say he does. He definitely writes the Avengers well. It's just whether or not they really are substantial to the story is the other thing. Like you have, as you mentioned before, all the protesters about Namor joining the team. You have Janet Van Dyne having some nice moments with Jarvis, although he's thinner here than normal. I don't know why Buscema and Palmer gave him
And they
kind of a
mention it
much,
too
yeah, that he's skinnier now.
that he went on a diet. Yeah.
I wonder if that was a Stern thing because it was plot first, right? So he looked at it and it's like, why is Jarvis so skinny? Instead of having them redo this, I'll just build in a lot of dialogue. Like that's classic old school Marvel. Like something on the page, I have to address this in some way because the page itself doesn't explain it. So I'm going to throw it into a line of dialogue. I love that. It's very hokey but very fun.
That's the fun part about this entire generation of comics is that you could get away with some hokey stuff because there was still an innocence and like let's play with the toys in the sandbox. And I think that's why at this stage um writers who had been fans previously, it's like the first crop of comic book creators who were originally fans and wanted to be writers. It's like them playing with these toys and building upon them, but in a way where it's like, now you take it. Now you can do this because I tried that. So now you can have divergent Kangs, or there's a relationship between Kang and Doctor Doom that can be explored because somebody built that house of cards, if you will. That, be careful what you do with it. Like, don't mess it
Mhm.
up, but now you can build on that. So I think that's the fun part about this era of that sort of classic Saturday morning cartoon feel it has, but there's a lot of doors being opened. Like, let's try this because
Mhm.
they were fans writing him, right?
Yeah. I will say, I really think I loved about the artwork by Buscema and Palmer, since I've only said bad things so far,
Like,
is I did really like their interpretation of Hercules, as much as
yes, I did
maybe
too.
it's maybe a silly costume with the headpiece and the green kind of weird girdle, but when you see the face that they give him, and again the way that the hair kind of falls and the way the beard looks and some of the confounded looks that he has, it looks so accurate to what interpret that character to be. And a lot of what you would later see with like Ron Friends doing a lot of that when he used him in the Thor run as well. So I really like how Buscema drew him here. I thought that was very, of the character. The only character, and not necessarily that he got wrong, it just felt so odd, but it was obviously part of the point, is that in that first issue that we're talking about, when you have that shot of Namor showing up with the lobsters, or I don't know if they're crabs or what, I don't know what he had in his hands, and he has that kind of sad, like funny look on his face, like he's so happy. I'm just not used to seeing Namor happy that it felt weird.
That's true. So up until this point, Namor was still like an anti-hero in the Marvel universe, or like how was he sort of interpreted up to this point?
I think yes. I mean, the Defenders aren't really well known, right? Like
Yeah.
they're not a public team, so he's doing heroic things, but no one would necessarily see him that way. It's funny because him, though those protests against Namor really persist throughout this entire kind of, I guess, in this epic that you have, like it doesn't go away.
No.
It just kind of stays in the background that people do not like Namor, and it's funny because it's a completely understandable take for people in the Marvel universe, but it's only ever done in this one run, and then no one really talks about it again. And if you think about it, not long after this, what, maybe 3 4 years tops, you have John Byrne, gives Namor a radical makeover in his Namor the Submariner book. He's the head of what, Oracle Inc. or whatever, and he's like a
Yeah,
businessman. It's completely different take, and anything about any lingering thoughts in the MU about Namor being a good guy is kind of swept under the rug.
right, right. Yeah, I hadn't, admittedly, I haven't read a lot of Namor stuff, but every time you're right, every time I see him, he's in a mood. So for
Yeah.
him to be happy to be a part of the Avengers here was a very different sort of take on the character from my experience. But I like it. Again, it's I don't know, this art was the Tom Palmer and Buscema artwork. Like, I could just look at it all day. I would never get tired of reading a book like this, even though it's of its time
Mm.
and it's sort of classic comic booky.
Well,
It's just
speaking of
good.
classic comic booky, when you have when the first time you really see Hercules and Black Knight here, and they're on that gigantic boring machine, and they're just getting a way to go to, I guess, Hydro Base, and they're going under the city, which I don't think they have a zoning permit for that, but that's a whole other thing. That felt very comic books. Like that was just like we're gonna connect our bases, and we're gonna bore a giant tunnel. Like that feels very kind of old school. It's something that you probably wouldn't see in modern comics because they'd be like,
No.
well, we have to explain how this makes sense, and there'd be zoning and there'd be bylaws,
Yeah,
and this is just Stern just being like, this is comics. Let's just have
let's
fun.
just do it. Yeah.
Um, and then you have the whole idea of like the space phantom, or it starts off as being the Hulk that they're fighting, and then it looks like Giant Man, and then it looks like Iron Man, and again, like it's fine, and the Avengers are just kind of, they just kind of show up in Limbo, and then they're just kind of dealing with stuff, and they spend a lot of time just standing over that body that looks like Giant Man for like, it feels like forever. Like it just feels like a long time. You have Captain America, Captain Marvel, or a CM as he keeps calling her, and Namor, hanging out on this boat. and they're there for a while. Then you have the Avengers, or the Avengers in Limbo, fighting against Kang, and Kang doing a lot of classic Kang things, shouting to the skies about his plans. Like, that feels very old school comics. It was fun and a blast to read.
Yeah, I'm happy that you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it too. This I've read this last year actually when me and Dave were prepping for an Avengers villain episode, and
Mm-hmm.
I had always heard of this and I never read it. So I wanted to. It was an easy, quick. I thought it was going to be an easy, quick 3 issue read, but 3 issues from this era, you gotta give it some time. Not that it'll take you
Mm-hmm.
forever, but there's a lot on the page. Like you said before, the passage of time in these books, um, it can jump forward and back. And this being a time travel story, clearly that happens a lot. But you still feel like when you're with these characters in certain scenes, you're really with them. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
talking to each other. They're trying to formulate a plan, and sometimes it's to the for the benefit of the kid that was reading it at the time, so that they get everything explained to them. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. There's a charm to that still. I miss that.
Well, there's a lot of things that I miss, and a lot of it is typified in this type of issue. Like, in the second issue that we're talking about, there's what, 22 pages of story here. So that's again a good length, especially when
Hmm.
modern comics are what, 17, 18 these days. So it's a lot of story. You get a lot of more real estate for them to play with. As I said, you get a lot more. You have time for characterization, but I feel like it's almost compressed storytelling as opposed to decompressed, because you have so much happen in
Yeah,
3 issues, where,
yeah.
like, in modern comics, this should be like a 6 issue arc, or maybe
Oh,
12
easy.
or 10 issues, 12 issues, depending on the
For
writer,
sure, for
right?
sure. There's a lot to pull from it.
But there's something nice about just having these tiny chunks where you kind of get in and then get out with a huge swath of story. And a big part of that, to shout out the art, is, you have that first page. I'm going to look at the second issue just in particular. You start off with the first page as the full page splash. And then you move into a lot of grid work, and so you got like a six panel page, then you got another 5 panel page, but this time you have in a totally different layout. You have 3 panels at the top that are longer, and then you have two wider panels at the bottom. Then you go into the next one, and there you have technically, I guess, a 6 panel page. And one of the panels isn't really a panel because it's kind of inset and behind the other. So he's playing with the form. They're playing with how the storytelling is happening. The next page where you have the Space Phantom reveal, you have 6 panels, but one of the panels aren't directly in a line. Like, one of them is at the bottom of the page, is kind of moved over to the right, so it gives you a little bit more space for one of the panels. And again, it keeps it off center, it keeps it off kilter, so it's not
Which
just
issue are you speaking about, Adam?
the second one. So
The
I guess
second issue,
268.
268. Okay, cool, cool, cool.
Um,
Keep going.
so, and again, by playing with the panel layout like this, and then you go to another one, it's 5 panels, but now you got the two big panels at the top and three smaller ones at the bottom. I felt like it definitely kept the pace changing, which was nice, because that's one thing that comics can do different. And I'm actually rereading,
Here's an
understanding
example,
comics.
guys. Keep talking, Adam. Here's just an example. We
Great
can show
examples.
this now.
There you go. So I'm currently rereading Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud with my son, and it did remind me about how intricate the idea was that in comics they control the pace, and you as the reader also control the pace in a way that you can't in any other medium. Like, when you watch TV, the TV, it moves at the speed that the images are moving at, right? Like, you can slow it down, but then you're not listening to it anymore, right? Like, it's different. Whereas here, by changing the sizes, it kind of trains your mind to, oh, this is a bigger panel, I'm going to spend more time looking at these
Hmm.
details. This
Hmm.
is a smaller one, I'm going to go a little faster. So you're kind of speeding up and slowing down based on
That's the beauty.
how
That's the
Buscema
beauty of
is.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Buscema is just such a master of his craft that he keeps switching it up. So you never know
Yeah.
how many panels are going to be in a page or what the dimensions are going to be, and he's switching them back and forth. And I found it really engaging as an issue to kind of, you know look at it. And again, I think the most he ever puts on a page is what, one, two, three, four, five, maybe 7 panels. I think is the most that's ever on here. But again, it keeps it moving. He doesn't always have an exact border. Sometimes they kind of live between the borders of others. So I'm really enjoying how Buscema laid out the issue, and I think again, there's so much being wedged in here by Stern. You get a lot of good character work. You do get to live with these Avengers for these 3 issues, even though, as I said, I don't think this is impactful to them as a team. It is nice to see what is going on in their minds. Captain Marvel is dealing with, I'm an Avenger now. I'm not really used to this. I'm on a team with Captain America. That's so crazy. Oh, there's Namor. I only think of him as a villain, but he's actually got this other side. In the last issue that we're talking about in 269, you also have that great shot of Hercules straining with all his might against this thing and finally started to break free. And again, that's given so much tension, and there's time for that moment to build, that you feel the intensity, because it's not just like a quick, like, I've been straining for 5 minutes and now I've done this. Like, it is seeded into those pages and those panels. You can feel the desperation. You can feel it building within Hercules. And so again, as a reader, it's so engaging and so enjoyable, because you really feel like, this is all really happening to these people, that they're really put through their paces. Even though it's just 3 issues, don't think that that's, as you said, like, oh, I'm just going to read these before bed. No,
No,
this is going to take a little bit more time to digest, because they're 80s comics, they're 22 pages, and there's a lot going on.
yeah. And the other cool thing about this era of the Avengers in particular is that you don't have all the usual suspects. Like you see a few of them,
Sure.
like if you're a longtime Avenger fan, you'd recognize that Captain America and the Wasp have been teammates from the beginning, but you're not seeing Thor in every issue. You're not seeing Iron Man there.
Hmm.
There's no Hawkeye. It's not the movie version of the
No.
Avengers here. It's characters we're being introduced to now in the MCU bit by bit, but a lot of them are like the Black Knight as an Avenger, but it works if you've got the right writer.
Yes, it does
Put
work. It's interesting, yeah, because this was Bendis's point when he made the New Avengers. He's like, why aren't the New Avengers, or so why aren't the Avengers with the biggest names that Marvel has? Why do you have weird names? Like, why is it Black Knight, a guy who's never going to have his own solo book, or not a very long term one, right? But yeah, it's interesting, because if you look at it, they've subbed out. They still have a god, but now instead of having Thor, now they've got Hercules.
Hercules.
They've got a tech guy, but instead of having Iron Man, they have Black Knight. And you've got a big strong guy. Instead of having like Hulk or Giant Man, you've got Namor. So your prototypical pieces are there. They're
Right.
just someone else is kind of picking up that slack, and it's really interesting. I guess the only one who doesn't really quote unquote fit, because they don't usually have someone of that magnitude, is Captain Marvel. In terms of her
Right.
power set is so different, but everyone else kind of fits a role, and it makes sense. But yeah, it's definitely an odd team. I mean, this is, in general, I would say the 80s are a very odd period for the Avengers. Again, you are going to have characters like Dr. Druid. You're going to have Gilgamesh. You're going to have, at the tail end of the 80s, you have Reed Richards and Sue Storm are going to be on the team. Like, what is going on here? Like, although one of my favorite moments, I think it's in issue 300, where they form this new team. And I'm pretty sure they basically do like a hand moment where they all kind of, decide they're going to be Avengers together, over a sleeping Franklin in his crib, and it's just like, what? Why is this where you're having your big momentous Avengers moment? I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure that's where it happens.
Yeah, it's become the team that everyone eventually becomes a member in, but at this point in time, it was superstar characters, right? Like the original Avengers clearly, but not they weren't always the most popular characters in the Marvel universe, which is what kind of made it cool when the right
Hmm.
writer, scripter, artist got to play with those toys. You got to have some fun. And what was cool about this is when they do split up the team in their teams of three, you see how each of them have to use their strengths together in order to solve whatever problem that they're in. The wasp being able to shrink, one
Hmm.
person being able to that has the power of a deity, if you will.
Hmm.
So it was, yeah, I it's one of those moments where you're thinking where it makes me realize like this isn't the Avenger team that I would put together, but it's one of my favorite eras of the
Hmm.
team to read, which says a lot about the team there, the
I mean,
creative team.
a big reason why you have, in this period, really weird characters being added to the Avengers is because they don't have their own books. They can actually, if you're a writer, it must be difficult to do an Avengers book, because just like doing a Justice League book, you are not really making, you're not the one with the last say on this character. You know,
Yeah.
if I'm doing an Avengers story and I have Captain America and I really want to put Captain America through his paces, at the end of the day, I'm not the Captain America book. Anything meaningful that's probably going to happen to that character is going to appear in the Captain America book, not in my Avengers book.
Right.
But if I'm writing Black Knight, no one else is writing Black Knight, so I can do what I want and I can really
Right.
play with them. Captain Marvel here is the same thing. Like he can really use that character and do anything he wants because she's not really being spoken for anywhere else. And
And he
so
created
if
her.
you,
It's still kind of his baby, right?
that's
Still,
right.
she's still pretty fresh at the time.
I was wrong. It's not a crib in Avengers 300, but it is a sleeping Franklin in a bed, and they're just you can't see it because I'm just kind of holding up my little iPad Mini here, but they're
That's because your
deciding that.
screen is blurry. If you put it where your face is, I might be
Oh,
able to see it. There
let
you
me
go.
see.
A little
I
bit
don't know if
better.
a little bit better. It's
Little-
weird. I'll tell you that. Although it's interesting, I as I was trying to pull up that page, the first page of Avengers 300 has Kang flying through the time stream, and it does make me want to kind of go back because it says he's been in the time stream since I think Avengers 296. I'm like, well, hold on a second. I just saw him in 269. I want to know what happens next. So I will say, having read these three issues, which I did not really feel that same way when we read the Thor epic or the Silver Surfer epic, is that I would like to continue from this point and see what happens
That's good.
with both the characters and the villain in particular, to see what happens next with him, which is hard to find. And so I'll have to check again this reading guide that Dave has put together because online it's a hodgepodge. You know, even Marvel's own, like Marvel Unlimited, like it's hard to find stuff in a good order.
Yeah, he's got a few different versions that you can pick and choose from, but it's I was like, how does the story go from if the beginning of Kang it should start with Fantastic Four, but he's got it in actual like story form
Mhm.
chronological order. I'm like, that's impressive and crazy. but
Is
for people
crazy.
but for people like us, it's like what we've been looking for. It's like, thank you. Someone's done this. That's awesome.
Hmm. Yeah, for
Uh
sure.
so where would you rank this story amongst your Kang stories?
Um, Probably third or fourth. Um, which is in no way a slight against it. It's just I
There's
mean
a lot of
my
good Kang
my top
stories.
two is always going to be the ones by Busick. It's those are just I think he
Me
for
too.
me was just my favorite Kang writer. And to be fair, he's writing it after a lot of this groundwork has been laid. You don't have well, for better or for worse, you don't have Avengers Forever without all the other complicated things that happened in the past, of which this is one. So,
Right.
he's able to build on what other people have done. Whereas I would say Kang Dynasty exists as I said, that's more of a pure Kang story because there's a lot less of this kind of complicated Kang chicanery of who Kang is and different versions of Kang and Immortus and all that. It's just a straight up Kang comes and he's gonna take over the earth. Like that's more straightforward than what Avengers Forever is, which makes sense. After Avengers Forever, would you want to do another super complicated Kang story where you just fixed it? No, you don't. So I, again,
And that run had a lot of plot lines interconnecting with each other. I wouldn't want to complicate it more with time travel.
no. And so I probably put, as I said, three or four. And again, that's in no way a slight against this.
No, I don't think it is at all.
There's been a lot of Kang stories, this is definitely a pretty important one overall in terms of what it starts to add. The idea of having multiple Kangs kind of working together, destroying other versions or deeming other variants of the. I mean, we're used to the idea of a variant now. That's a very vogue word in the MCU. But basically, just destroying these variants. It's again, we're seeing these play out on the big screen now. So you don't have that if this doesn't exist. So it's extremely impactful and important to the legacy of Kang as a character.
Yeah. Yeah, good call. I agree. I hope everybody we didn't really spoil much of the actual story, so I hope
No,
it encourages people to want to go and check this out,
I
which
will
is the
say
point.
so. I'm not going to spoil it because again, it happens at the end. I was wondering about something just in general because I knew. Again, I'm going to go very really vague here because I don't actually want to ruin anything. But obviously, when you think of Kang, you think of a few things, a few different names he's gone under. and there's a lot of time spent on the Ramatut stuff, which I love any time when they use that. I don't know if you've ever read Rise of Apocalypse, where they tied in
I
uh,
heard of this. I've heard of it.
Immortus was around in the very early years when Apocalypse or N7er was around, but not yet like powerful.
Right, right.
But Ramatut was around, which so I love the Ramatut stuff, and obviously I love Immortus. So I liked this was so focused on Kang. Kang is Kang, and not as the other things, but it doesn't forget those as well. And
Yes.
I liked how
Yes.
that was integrated. I think that's
Yes.
as delicately as I can put that.
Yes. Good point. That's a good way to put it. I like that wrap up. Very nice. Well, everybody, I hope you check out these 3 issues. It's a lot of fun. If you're interested in Kang as a villain now in the MCU, this is a really cool place to start your reading because it does give you like a primer. It's a really interesting primer of what the character, where he comes from, where he's gone through, and what he can do. So you never know with the MCU. There's a lot of potential of things that they could unfold because of a character like this. So this is a good primer, I think. Um,
I will say, so Dave has that Kang the Conqueror miniseries. I believe this is the one. He has it listed as kind of the latest on his chronological order, besides the two timeless one shots that came out in 2022 and 2023, which is interesting. So I'll have to read it again and see if that kind of fits. My favorite thing on his chronological list, though, is probably the oddest place you would ever expect to see Kang, which is Silver Sable in the Wild Pack.
that's the thing. It's like, did you read that? He's like, yeah, I did. I read it once. I'm like, man, you've read everything that you write about. That's really cool. But it's like, wow, dedication,
Hmm.
dedication. Um, Next book of the month club, we're planning to
Oof.
do Superman, Man of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
That was your recommendation.
It was, and it is. It'd be exciting to go through it because it's been a minute since I've had a chance to actually read it. But I'm excited to give it another once over. I'm a huge fan of Kurt Swan. Um, he's just something so classic about his art. It's maybe not the most quote unquote dynamic, but it's very, I don't know. It feels if Silver Age Superman could give me a hug, it would be Kurt Swan. Kurt Swan Superman. Like it just there's just something very comforting about how he drew the character, which for some is probably not a good thing because they like more edges and they don't like Superman to be you know your dad. Just he's kind of a dad bod Superman and very much of the very patriarchal, but I don't know. But there's just something very warm and comforting to me about that. Probably has something to do with the fact that the first time I ever actually saw Superman in the comic, I believe he was drawn by Kurt Swan. So that definitely has a piece of it. But yeah, there's just something really nice about it. But you merge Kurt Swan with Alan Moore, who couldn't be on the face of it more different, is just so fascinating.
True. That's very true. It'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to rereading that. It's been a few years, and I know a lot of people put it up there as must read Superman stories, and Alan Moore. Oh, Alan Moore, right? So it'll be fun to read it.
I've never felt that way,
Me
but
neither.
because I came to it afterwards, right? So like after not afterwards, but like uh, the major works. If he was Hercules, the major labors of Hercules had already been completed. So I didn't get to see as he was doing the labors. I got to see it afterwards, and it was maybe less exciting and less impressive when the labors have already been done. And I don't know if that's a good example or not, but
It's a
like
good example. I get
so
it.
I'm hearing that Hercules did all these great things, but I didn't really get to experience it when I was, when it was happening. And so, reading things by Alan Moore now is never going to feel the same as people who were experiencing it at the time because he was changing comics. He was
Yeah.
changing the interpretation of what you could do or what some people believed you could do in comics. But when we're reading and that's already happened and people have already started implementing things that he's done, it's not going to have the same impact on us ultimately. And what's so good about what we're going to talk about with that Alan Moore story is obviously it's a capper to an era with someone who we do not think of as being part of that era. Like it closes the door
Right.
on the Silver Age Superman, but no one thinks of Alan Moore as Silver Age. They think of him
Right.
as copper or modern. So it's interesting, and he's the one who kind of has the last word to say on Superman before Crisis. Before that happens, and before we
Yes.
get the John Birdification of Superman, which persists for a long time before they start going back to a pre-crisis sensibility, which eventually does happen, but it didn't happen for a long time.
Yes, that's a good primer to get us ready for that episode. Thank you. That's good. I'm now looking forward to reading this again. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Everybody who's watched, subscribe on whatever platform you prefer, or on every platform that you watch us on. That would be great. We love the engagement. We love having special guests on the show. Adam, thank you for coming on. Everybody, make sure to check out the Comic Shenanigans archives for some of the best interviews amongst comic professionals, legends, current comic makers, artists, you name it. Comic Shenanigans. And of course, omniversecomics.guide. I'm Eric Anthony. We'll be back soon for another Book of the Month Club. Signing off, everybody. Thank you.